VFA 96 Black Demons, Leo, 019 hours TFT. Lieutenant Connor threw her Starblade into a hard left roll and engaged her forward grav projector. A brief burst of acceleration at 20,000 gravities, and she was hurtling past the incoming projectiles, several of which flared into vapor as she brushed them with the intensely warped pucker of space just ahead of her fighter. Two of the Totlers ahead and below twisted around to meet her, but she caught one in a target lock with her PBP-8 and slammed it with a high-energy particle beam, flashing the fighter into star-hot vapor. The Pan-European Totlers, Death Eagles, were highly advanced modern fighters. They easily matched USNA fighters like the SG-101 Velociraptor, but they were utterly outclassed by the newer Starblades. Connor could feel her mind pervading every part of her ship's consciousness, directing weapons, power, thrust, and attitude together in a rapturous dance. Her fighters shuddered as a KK projectile passed through one temporary wing, but the nanomatrix hull flowed around the slug as it passed through, directing it harmlessly past the pilot compartment and other vital elements and back into space. Connor didn't need to spin the craft. Rather, she simply reformed it in flight, bringing weapons to bear on the second target and vaporizing it in a flare of radiation and plasma. Demon 5, she called over the TAC channel. 2 kills. Demon 7, scratch one, toddy velocicrapper. And the fighters merged in an angry tangle of fire and destruction. Emergency Presidential Command Post, Toronto, United States of North America, 020 hours EST. Koenig emerged again from his virtual connection. A chorus of screams and yells filled the Presidential Command Center and rang off the walls. A room full of military officers, civilian officials, aides, and technicians, jumping and shouting, hugging one another, and slapping hands together, congratulating each other. In a smaller room just off the center's main control room, Koenig blinked against the overhead lights. "What the hell is that noise?" he asked. "The guys are going a little nuts, sir," Whitney replied. "They got Carosi." "I know," Koenig said, sitting up. "I was there. And it was the 1-5 Marines who got the bastard, not us." "It was a group effort, Mr. President." He gestured toward the other room. "They found Carosi and they tracked him to Verdun, and you gave the order." "And the Marines dug him out and rescued Rutgen. Tell them to knock it off and get back on the job. We still have to withdraw our people." "Yes, sir." Whitney's attempt to spread credit for the success around irritated him. Koenig had a particular and heartfelt disdain for the type of national leader who assumed the credit for his or her military successes. "I directed. I ordered. We attacked." Bullshit. It was the men and women who were boots on the ground in theater, the ones getting shot at and taking the risks, who should get the credit. Not the damned rear echelon motherfuckers, or REMFs, peering over their shoulders through drone cameras, satellites, or in-head links. Admiral Eugene Armitage, the head of the Joint Chiefs, grinned at him. "But we did get the bastard, Mr. President." "Yes," Koenig said, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. "We got him." Whitney nodded. "There's more, Mr. President. You might have missed it, but they just flashed the word back. They've captured Denois as well, trying to leave the perimeter by air car." Koenig smiled. His chief of staff was scolding him mildly by letting him know that the information he'd wanted had come through to the command post just as quickly as Koenig could have gotten it from a direct link. "Outstanding, Marcus," he glanced at Armitage. "Admiral," he said, "please flash Meteor a well done from me personally." Armitage nodded. "As you wish, Mr. President." There is still one part unresolved, sir," Whitney told him. "The recovery, yes. I assume you have the heavy transports on the way?" "Yes, sir, but it's not that." "What then?" 8 Totlers, launched a few minutes ago from a site in southern Turkey, a city called Adana." "Adana? What do they have there?" "It's one of Turkey's larger cities, sir, and the site of a small spaceport in Jurlik." Koenig nodded as data flowed through his in-head. "Got it." Once, Incirlik had been a joint U.S. and Turkish military airbase, back in the days of the old NATO alliance. After the mid-2100s and the beginnings of the Pax Confederata, the facilities had been developed as a local spaceport for Pan-Europe's burgeoning asteroid mining initiatives. Turkey, geographically astride both Europe and Asia, had been an ideal region for economic development after both the Islamic Wars and the more recent Sino-Western Wars. But the rise of the space elevators, first at Supra Quito, then in Kenya and in Singapore, had perhaps already doomed such antiquated assets as national spaceports. There wasn't much at Incirlik now, save for a small military base. But why were they attacking the USNA fighters in Leo? For a moment, Koenig watched the data flow describing the slash and stab of aerospace fighters in low orbit. That why was becoming an increasingly important question. With the fighting on the Verdun Planetary Defense Center all but over, there was no reason to challenge American space superiority, none at all. Unless... He called up a holographic map display, the board hanging transparent in mid-air showing the orbit of America's space superiority fighters southeast across the Balkans, Turkey, the Arabian Peninsula, and out over the Indian Ocean. A red dot flashed at the northeastern corner of the Med, marking Incirlik. 4 of America's fighters had just shot down the last of the Totatlers from the base. 4 more USNA Starblades were 4,000 kilometers ahead, coming up now on the southern tip of India. "A second launch, Mr. President," Armitage reported. "More Death Eagles." "How many?" "5, sir." "No, make that 6. "From where?" "Surat, Mr. President. North India." "Curiouser and curiouser," Koenig said, thoughtful. Surat was a large city on India's northwestern coast, next to the Gulf of Combat. "I think those Death Eagles are trying to punch a hole through our orbiting squadron," Koenig said. "For what possible purpose, sir?" Whitney asked. "For an escape." "Admiral Armitage." "Sir." "I suggest you order the Elliott and the Hawes down from their perch for a closer look." "Right away, sir." The Elliott was a destroyer massing 8,000 tons, the Hawes a smaller frigate, a light escort of about 3,000 tons. The two had recently been assigned to America's carrier group and were now deployed in HEO, high Earth orbit, about 30,000 kilometers out. "Who would be trying to escape, Mr. President?" Whitney asked. "If we have both Denois and Carossi..." "Might be members of Carossi's staff," Koenig said. "Or it might be the real architects of Columbus." "The real architects, Mr. President?" Whitney shook his head. "We already know Carossi was behind that, don't we?" "No, Marcus, we don't. He's a nasty character, I'll admit, but the Confederation really didn't have reason to eat a city, not when they had to take that big of a public relations hit." As Koenig had noted, the attack by the Confederation ship Extremadura, awful as it had been, had done more damage by far to the Confederation than to North America. Nation-states that had been sitting on the sidelines of the fast-evolving Civil War, the Chinese hegemony, and the Islamic theocracy especially, had openly come into the war against the Confederation. Perhaps just as important, members of the Confederation, including Russia, North India, and England, had immediately distanced themselves from the world state, with Russia and North India both seceding from the Geneva government. But the politics over there were still murky. One of the Confederation ships escorting the Extremadura on her deadly mission, Koenig remembered, had been the North Indian heavy cruiser Brahmaputra. At least some within the North Indian government, clearly, had known about the nature of the attack that had destroyed Columbus, and approved of it. If fighters were coming up from Surat, they might well be piloted by officers still loyal to Carossi, even if New Delhi had disowned the guy since the attack. And knowing if that was true was crucial. With the takedown of the last major fortress controlled by Carossi forces, Koenig knew it was vital to maintain the momentum. Handled properly, Carossi's capture might end the war. So the question remained, who the hell was trying to escape the USNA's tightening noose? VFA 96 Black Demons, Leo, 022 hours TFT. Megan Connor thought-clicked a symbol, sending 2 VG-10 Crate missiles streaking toward the last Confederation fighter. At a range of just 200 kilometers, the missiles detonated in twin flares of dazzling silent light, and the enemy Totatler disintegrated in tumbling, half-molten fragments. Elsewhere in the sky, soft glowing clouds of expanding hot plasma and debris marked the passings of the other fighters. One had re-entered the atmosphere below, a streak of ablating hull material scratched across the intense blue of the Indian Ocean. Through her communications link, Connor could hear the chatter among the other pilots in her squadron.
Nice shot, 5. That's a kill.
The last one! Hot damn, and we didn't lose a single damn ship! That was pretty spectacular, Connor thought. 8 fighters in that first launch out of Turkey, and 6 more from North India. 14 fighters against 4 of the new Starblades, and every single one of them shot down without a single loss. That was worth a hot damn in anyone's flight log. Hey, Skipper, Demon 6. My scanners weren't picking up any people in those ships.
Copy that, 6. Americus S2 concurs. They were all on AI.
Shit, why? Aren't we good enough for them? For centuries, the debate had continued to natter back and forth over the need for human pilots in fighter cockpits. Undeniably, artificial intelligences were faster than humans, sharper, more immediately aware, and surer in their assessment of data. But humans seemed to add a degree of creativity and inspired improvisation to the mix. So far, at least, the best tactical advantage seemed to rest with human brains cybernetically wired into AI-controlled spacecraft. And the 14-0 victory they'd just won was a resounding validation of that. That and the fact that the new Starblade design left even the most advanced Confederation spacecraft chewing hard vacuum. But maybe the unbalanced outcome wasn't so surprising after all, since it had involved enhanced humans fighting machines. Especially machines on some sort of preset program. Skipper, she said, running through her sensor feeds. See that to the north?
What the hell?
That's a fucking starship, she exclaimed, running hot and under escort. And now the Confederation's plan was clear. The attack, rising from a spaceport in Turkey, had served to scatter the 4 fighters riding that part of the space superiority orbit. Not badly, but a little. The second wave of enemy fighters coming south from Surat had scattered the flight even further. The nearest other fighter to Connor's right now was Mackey's, a good 1,500 kilometers to her southeast. And with the 4 Starblades scattered all over the sky, now was when the enemy was launching something big, and escorted by 12 more Totatlers. The ship is cloaked, Connor reported, but I'm getting a mass of around 4,000 tons. Small, Lieutenant Ruxton said. Frigate size.
Fleet Combat Command is designating the target as Charlie 1, Mackey said.
Where the hell is our cap ship backup? Dobbs was referring to the 2 capital ships, the Hawes and the Elliott, which had been ordered down to Leo to support the USNA fighters.
On the way, Demon 6, Mackey replied. In the meantime, let's see what we can do.
Connor was trying to read through the enemy's cloaking, which was an offshoot of gravitic screening. The technology to bend light around a ship, affording partial invisibility, had been around for several centuries, but the effort generally wasn't worth the power consumption, or the fact that a cloaked ship couldn't see out any more than others could see in. There really was little point in doing it at all, unless there was something about that small starship that the Confederation didn't want the Americans to see. Now, what the hell, she wondered, were the bastards trying to hide?
All okay here on the relay circuit?
Yelled Astro through the intercom from the power deck.
Okay.
Answered Tom.
Now try out the automatic blowers for the main tubes.
Want to give me a little juice for the radar antenna, Astro?
Called Roger from the radar deck.
In a minute, Manning, in a minute.
Growled Astro.
I only got 2 hands, you know.
You should learn to use your feet.
Quipped Roger.
Any normal Venusian can do just as much with his toes as he can with his fingers.
Back and forth, the bantering had gone for 12 hours while the three members of the Polaris unit tested, checked, adjusted and rechecked the many different circuits, relays, junction boxes and terminals in the miles of delicate wiring woven through the ship. Now, as dawn began to creep pink and grey over the eastern horizon, they made their last-minute search through the cavernous spaceship for any doubtful connections. Satisfied there were none, the three weary cadets assembled on the control deck and sipped the hot tea that Manning had thoughtfully prepared.
You know, by the time we get out of the academy, I don't think there'll be a single inch of this space wagon that I haven't inspected with my nose,
commented Roger in a tired voice.
You know you love it, Manning.
Said Astro, who, though as tired as Tom and Roger, could still continue to work if necessary. His love for the mighty atomic rocket motors and his ability to repair anything mechanical was already a legend around the Academy. He cared for the power deck of the Polaris as if it were a baby.
Might as well pack in and grab some sleep before we report to Captain Strong,
said Tom.
He might have us blasting off right away, and I, for one, would like to sleep and then sleep some more.
I've been thinking about what Alfie had to say,
said Roger.
You know, about this being a great adventure?
What about it?
Asked Astro.
Well, you don't give this kind of overhaul for just a plain short hop upstairs.
You think it might be something deeper?
Asked Astro softly.
Whatever it is,
said Tom, getting up.
We'll need sleep.
He rose, stretched, and walked wearily to the exit port. Astro and Roger followed him out, and once again they boarded the slidewalk for the trip back to their main dormitory in the quarters on the 42nd floor. A half hour later, the three members of the Polaris were sound asleep. Early morning found Captain Steve Strong in his quarters, standing at the window and staring blankly out over the quadrangle. In his left hand he clutched a sheaf of papers. He had just reread for the 5th time a petition for reinstatement of space papers for Al Mason and Bill Loring. It wasn't easy, as Strong well knew, to deprive a man of his right to blast off and rocket through space, and the papers in question, issued only by the Solar Guard, comprised the only legal license to blast off. Originally issued as a means of preventing overzealous Earthmen from blasting off without the proper training or necessary physical condition, which resulted in many deaths, space papers had gradually become the only effective means of controlling the vast expanding force of men who made spaceflight their life's work. With the establishment of the Spaceman's Code 100 years before, firm rules and regulations for spaceflight had been instituted. Disobedience to any part of the code was punishable by suspension of papers and forfeiture of the right to blast off. One of these rules stated that a spaceman was forbidden to blast off without authorization or clearance for a free orbit from a central traffic control. Bill Loring and Al Mason were guilty of having broken the regulation. Members of the crew of the recent expedition to Tara, a planet in orbit around the sun star Alpha Centauri, they had taken a rocket scout and blasted off without permission from Major Connell, the commander of the mission, who in this case was authorized traffic control officer. Connell had recommended immediate suspension of their space papers. Mason and Loring had petitioned for a review, and to assure impartial judgment, Commander Walters had sent the petition to one of his other officers to make a decision. The petition had landed on Strong's desk. Strong read the petition again and shook his head. The facts were too clear. There had been flagrant disregard for the rules, and there was no evidence to support the suspended spaceman's charge that they had been unjustly accused by Connell. Strong's duty was clear. He had to uphold Major Connell's action and suspend the men for a year. Once the decision was made, Strong put the problem out of his mind. He walked to his huge circular desk and began sorting through the day's orders and reports. On the top of the pile of papers was a sealed envelope, bordered in red and marked classified. It was from Commander Walters' office. Thoughtfully, he opened it and read.
To Captain Steve Strong, Cadet Supervisor, Polaris Unit. Upon receipt of this communication, you are ordered to transfer the supervisory authority of the cadet unit designated as Polaris Unit, i.e. Cadets Tom Corbett, Roger Manning, and Astro, and the command of the rocket cruiser Polaris, to the command and supervisory authority of Major Connell for execution of mission as outlined herein. 1. To test range, life, and general performance of audio communications transmitter type X-21. 2. To test the above-mentioned transmitter under conditions of deep space flight. 3. This test to take place on the planet Terra, Alpha Centauri. This communication and all subsequent information relative to above-mentioned mission shall be classified as topmost secret. Signed, Walters, Commandant, Space Academy.
So that's it.
He thought.
A hop into deep space for the Polaris unit.
He smiled.
The cadets of the Polaris unit are in for a little surprise in two ways.
He thought.
One from the mission and one from Major Connell.
He almost laughed out loud as he turned to the small desk teleceiver at his elbow. He pressed a button immediately below the screen and it glowed into life to reveal a young man in the uniform of the enlisted guard.
Yes, Captain Strong?
He asked.
Call the cadets of the Polaris unit.
Strong ordered.
Have them report to me here, on the double.
Aye, aye, sir.
Strong started to turn the set off, but the enlisted man added,
By the way, sir, Al Mason and Bill Loring are here to see you.
Oh, well...
Strong hesitated.
They're quite anxious to know if you've reached any decision regarding their petition for reinstatement.
Yes, of course. Very well, send them in.
Aye, aye, sir.
The teleceiver screen blackened. In a moment, the door opposite Strong's desk slid back and Loring and Mason stepped into the office. They shambled forward and stopped in front of the huge desk, obviously ill at ease. Strong stood up, holding their petition in his hand, and glanced over it briefly, even though he knew its contents by heart. He motioned to nearby chairs.
Sit down, please.
He said. The two spacemen settled themselves uncomfortably on the edge of their chairs and waited expectantly as Strong continued to look at the paper. Loring finally broke the heavy silence.
Well, Captain Strong, have you made a decision?
He asked. Loring was a heavy-set man in his middle 40s. He needed a shave, and when he talked, his mouth twisted into an ugly grimace.
Hope it's in our favor, sir,
suggested Mason. He was shorter than Loring, and seated, his feet hardly reached the floor. His eyes darted nervously about the huge room, and he kept rolling a dirty black spaceman's cap in his hands.
Yes, I've reached a decision,
said Strong slowly. He faced the two men and looked at them both with a steady, cold stare.
I've decided to sustain Major Connell's action. You are both grounded for the next 12 months. Earth months.
What?
Shouted Loring, jumping to his feet. He banged his fist down on the desk and leaned over, his face close to Strong's.
You can't do that to us.
Captain Strong didn't move.
I can,
he said coldly.
And I have.
But
Mason began to whine.
But spaceflight's all we know. How will we live?
Strong sat down and leaned back in his chair to get away from the foul odour of Loring's breath. He stared at the two men.
You should have thought of that before you stole a rocket scout from the expedition and made an unauthorized flight while on Tara.
Strong replied.
You're lucky you're not accused, tried and convicted of theft of a Solar Guard spaceship.
We had permission to take that flight,
snarled Loring.
That Major Connell is so blasted space-happy he forgot he gave us permission. Then when we came back he slapped us in the brig.
Do you have any proof of that?
Asked Strong.
No, but it's our word against his.
He slammed his hat down on the desk and shook his finger in Strong's face.
You haven't any right to take away our papers just on the say-so of a lousy Solar Guard officer who thinks he's king of the universe.
Take your filthy hat off my desk, Loring,
barked Strong.
And watch your language.
Loring realised he'd made a mistake and tried to backtrack.
Well, I apologise for that, but I don't apologise for saying he thinks he's...
Major Connell has been in the Solar Guard for 30 years,
said Strong emphatically.
He's been awarded the Solar Medal 3 times. No other living spaceman has achieved that, not even Commander Walters. He rose through the ranks of the enlisted Solar Guard and was commissioned as an officer of the Solar Guard in space during an emergency. He qualifies higher than any other spaceman, and he has never been found to be unjust. He's one of the finest spacemen ever to hit the wide, deep and high.
Strong stopped, choked for breath and turned away. It wasn't often he lost his temper, but something had to be said in defence of his fellow officer, and particularly since that officer was Connell. He turned back to face the two spacemen, and his voice was hard and cold again.
You are hereby suspended from spaceflight for 12 Earth months. Any further petition for appeal of this decision will be denied.
All right, Mr. Big,
snapped Loring.
Does this mean we can't even ride as passengers?
No rights under the Universal Bill of Rights of the Solar Alliance have been denied you, except that of actively participating in the flight of a spaceship.
The signal bell of the teleceiver began to chime softly, and on the desk the teleceiver screen glowed again.
Cadets Corbett, Manning, and Astro are here for their assignments, sir,
announced the enlisted man outside. Loring glared at Strong.
I suppose you're going to send some punk kids out on the next trip to Tara and leave us experienced spacemen to rot on the ground, huh?
Strong didn't see the door slide open to admit the 3 cadets who entered quietly. His whole attention was focused on the ugly, glaring faces of Bill Loring and Al Mason.
Get this, Loring,
snapped Strong hotly.
The assignments of the Polaris unit, whether it be to Tara or the Moon, has nothing to do with your own breach of conduct. In any case, if they were to be assigned, they would do a better job than you experienced spacemen who are disrespectful of your superior officers and break regulations. If either of you makes one more crack about the Solar Guard or Space Cadets or anything at all, I'll take you out on the quadrangle and pound some common courtesy into your heads. Now, get out!
All right,
muttered Loring, retreating, but with a sneer on his lips.
We'll meet again, Mr. Big Shot Spaceman.
I hope so, Loring. And if we do, I hope you've taken a bath. You even smell bad.
From the rear of the room came a burst of laughter. Tom, Roger, and Astro, unobserved, had been listening and watching their skipper in action. When Loring and Mason had left the room, they advanced to the desk, came to attention, and saluted.
Polaris unit reporting for duty, sir.
Snapped Tom crisply.
At ease,
said Strong.
Did you hear all of that?
Yes, sir, Skipper.
Roger smiled.
And believe me, you really gave it to those 2 space bums.
Yeah,
agreed Astro.
but I don't think even you could do much for Loring. He's just born to smell bad.
Never mind that,
said Strong.
I suppose you heard the part about the assignments.
The 3 cadets assumed looks of pure innocence.
We didn't hear a thing, sir,
said Tom.
You'll make a fine diplomat, Corbett.
Strong laughed.
All right, sit down and I'll give it to you straight.
They hastily took seats and waited for their skipper to begin.
You've been assigned as cadet observers on a mission to test the range of a new long-range audio transmitter.
Strong paused, then added significantly.
The test is to take place in deep space.
The 3 cadets only beamed their enthusiastic approval.
Tara,
continued Strong,
is your destination. A planet like Earth in many respects, in orbit around the Sun star Alpha Centauri. You'll take the Polaris direct to the Venus space station, where the transmitter has been given primary tests. Outfit the Polaris for hyperdrive and blast off.
Excuse me, sir,
interrupted Tom.
but you say you.
I mean,
replied Strong.
You, in the sense that I won't be going along with you. Oh, don't worry,
said Strong, holding up his hand as a sudden look of anticipation spread over the faces of the 3 boys.
You're not going alone. You'll have a commanding officer, all right. In fact, you'll have the nearest thing to the perfect commanding officer in the Solar Guard.
He waited just long enough for each boy to search his mind for a suitable candidate, and then added,
Your skipper will be Major Connell.
Major Connell?
The 3 cadets cried in unison.
You mean Major Blast Off Connell?
Uttered Roger unbelievingly.
That's who I mean,
said Strong.
It's the best thing in the universe that could happen to you.
Roger stood up and saluted smartly.
I request permission to be dismissed from this mission on the grounds of incompatibility, sir,
he said.
Incompatible to what?
Asked Strong, amused.
To Major Connell, sir,
replied Roger.
Permission denied,
said Strong with a smile.
Back up, it isn't so bad.
Strong paused and stood up.
Well, that's it. It's close to 11 a.m, and you're to report to the Major at 11 on the nose. I hope you've got to the Polaris in good shape.
We were up all night, sir,
said Tom.
She's ready to go.
She's in better shape than we are,
said Astro.
Very well then. Report to Major Connell immediately. Your papers have been transferred, so all you have to do is report.
Strong rounded the desk and shook hands with each cadet.
This is an important mission, boys,
he said soberly.
See that you give Major Connell all the support I know you're capable of giving. He'll need it. I doubt if I'll see you before you blast off, so this is it. Spaceman's luck to each of you.
June 29th, 2425, USNA Star Carrier America, Naval Base, Quito Sync Orbital, 032 hours TFT. Admiral Trevor Sandy Gray was patched into the operations data stream in his private office, just off his sleeping quarters. According to ship's time, it was just past midnight, but he always had trouble sleeping when an op was going down, even with electronic sleep aids, and so he was stretched out on a recliner, following the data streams coming up from Earth. Operation Fallen Star was pretty much academic as far as he was concerned. Some of America's fighter squadrons had been deployed to Leo to provide aerospace superiority, but the carrier herself was docked at the Sync Orbital Naval Base and was taking no other part in the proceedings. He could turn in, he knew. Lori was waiting for him in the other room, unless she'd already fallen asleep. If so, he envied her that. America's AI was monitoring the feeds as well, of course, which should have further put him at ease. If anything happened, he'd be alerted immediately. As if the AI were reading his mind, he felt an inner nudge, directing his attention to new data. Confed fighter launches from Turkey and North India and something else. Now what the hell, he wondered aloud. Bridge, this is the Admiral. Gutierrez here, Admiral. Captain Sarah Gutierrez was America's skipper, and apparently she was burning the midnight photons as well. What the blazes just launched from North India? One moment, Admiral. We're tracking. Gutierrez was an excellent officer. His exec when he'd been captain of the America. His promotion to admiral and her promotion to captain both had been provisional, forced on them by the needs of a service desperate for experienced line officers. Gray didn't know how his evaluations were going to read next time, but he knew he was going to recommend her for permanent command of the America. Of course, if that happened, and Gray was not confirmed for a 4-star admiral's billet, he likely would end up flying a desk earthside. The thought was not a pleasant one. But as always, the needs of the service came first, especially in the middle of a war. Admiral, Gutierrez's voice said in his head, we're not getting a clear picture. All of our data is coming in by way of VFA 96. We don't have direct line of sight on them. A schematic drew itself in Gray's head. The globe of Earth, the space elevator towers, the various orbital facilities. Quito Sync Orbital reached almost 36,000 kilometers above Ecuador. North India was far around the curve of the Earth, almost exactly on the opposite side of the planet. What do we have? The target is well cloaked. We're tracking it by its mass ripple. Mass puckered surrounding space by its simple presence, an effect perceived as gravity. When that mass moved, the pucker dragged through the fabric of space-time, creating a wake or ripple, a unique signature that could be read by the appropriate long-range scanners. Sir, Gutierrez said after a moment's hesitation, these readings don't make sense. We may be tracking... What? It might be an alien spacecraft, Admiral. Non-human technology. Human starships used gravitic singularity projectors to warp space ahead of them in rapid-fire pulses, in effect, creating a moving gravity well that pulled the ship along after it with a smooth and uniform acceleration. Aerospace fighters, air cars, and other civilian and military flyers could operate within a planetary atmosphere, but using projectors powerful enough to move something as large as a starship near a planetary surface was a risky proposition, and technically extremely difficult. In fact, taking the gravitic projectors to the next higher level, using them to fold space around the ship in order to move faster than light, required a flat space-time matrix, meaning that you needed to be well clear of the local star, to say nothing of nearby planets. But possibly another technic and spacefaring species had figured out how to slip in and out of local gravity wells without a problem. Well, that might explain how the hell they got it down to the surface in the first place, Gray said finally. Elliot and Hawes are dropping down to Elio, sir, Gutierrez continued. ETA 8 minutes. And intelligence is still reading those fighters as uncrewed? The fighters are gone, sir. All destroyed. But they were under AI guidance, yes. I want a closer look at the ship boosting out from Earth, he said. How soon can we clear the dock? Almost immediately, Admiral. 5 minutes. Good, do it. I'm on my way to the flag bridge. We'll warm up your seat for you, sir. Breaking free from the data feed, Gray stood up and walked into his sleeping compartment. Laurie Taggart sat up in bed, naked and stretched. Sandy, you coming to bed? Nope, but I want you on the bridge ASAP. Commander Laurie Taggart was America's chief weapons officer and very, very good at what she did. The sensuousness was gone in an instant. She slid out of bed. What's happening? Check the feeds. He took a small wad of uniform from a bulkhead dispenser and slapped it against his bare chest. The black, programmed nanogel spread out from beneath his hand, rapidly covering his body from shoulders to hands and feet, complete with rank tabs at his throat. We have someone boosting out of North India in a hell of a hurry, and we're going to go after them. Taggart took a handful of shipboard utilities and let them cover her body. The microcircuitry grown inside them provided temperature control through quite a large range of environmental conditions, and with the addition of a helmet and shoulder-worn breather pack, could double as an emergency e-suit. As fashion statements, however, they left delightfully little to the imagination, which, Gray thought with mild surprise, was just fine. He was a prim and a Monoggy still, a product of the periphery and the edge of survival life in the half-drowned Manhattan ruins, the flooded canyons and crumbling towers that had been New York City until rising sea levels had drowned the place almost 3.5 centuries ago. He'd been a primitive, by virtue of not having an electronic connection to the most basic services of modern life, and a Monoggy because he'd been partnered with one woman. That woman's stroke, though, had driven him to seek medical help with the USNA. He'd been expected to pay for those services, of course, and had done so by joining the USNA Navy. He'd adjusted well enough, he thought. His wife, changed either by the stroke or by the rewiring of her brain at the medical center, had left him, and that was by far the most traumatic change to his life. He still missed her, but he'd found companionship and affection with people like Laurie, and had been making good progress in getting his life back together. Sexual relationships between senior and junior officers were not encouraged, but were not outright forbidden either. Laurie had been a more or less casual sex partner for a number of years now, and so long as the relationship didn't affect the performance of their respective duties, there was no problem. He was very careful never to show favoritism. Gray was still a thoroughgoing Monoggy, though, sticking to one relationship at a time. He had the periphery's mistrust of group marriages and promiscuously open sex, even if he had to accept that most people within the USNA saw him as at least mildly perverted in that regard. After a quarter century in the Navy, Trevor Gray found that he really didn't give a fuck what people thought about his private life. He swam onto the bridge just as Gutierrez gave the order to take America out of dock. While his quarters were inside one of the ship's rotating HAB modules, provided with half a G of spin gravity, the bridge was located on America's spine aft of the huge shield cap, and thus in microgravity. Cast off all magnetics and grapples, Gutierrez's voice was saying. Maneuvering aft, 1/10 G. Gray felt the slight nudge of acceleration as he slid into his command seat and let it gently grab hold. Since ships could not use their gravitic drives anywhere close to orbital structures like Quito Sync Orbital, not without causing serious structural damage, maneuvering in close was handled by a combination of tugs and plasma thrusters. The projections on the flag bridge bulkhead showed the America as seen from one of those tugs. The warship was enormous, the largest humans had yet launched, at over a kilometer in length overall, with a long and slender central spine extending aft from the massive umbrella shape of her shield cap. That forward tank, holding 27 billion liters of water, served both as reaction mass for the plasma thrusters and as shielding for relativistic velocities. From the tug's perspective, several hundred meters off, the star carrier was sliding very slowly from deep shade into bright sunlight. Earth was mostly in darkness at the moment, but the Sync orbital was far enough out that, at this time of the year, the sun peeked over the planet's north pole as a literal midnight sun. Not that the time of day or night, or the amount of incident sunlight meant much to spacefaring crews in any case. Slaving shipboard time to GMT-5 was purely for convenience. Clear of the immense sprawl of the naval base, itself a tiny fraction of the vast complex stretching out to either side from the 36,000-kilometer mark of the Quito space elevator, the star carrier fired her thrusters, generating another solid thump of acceleration, and slowly she began to turn. Lines of light and columns of flickering numbers painted themselves across the bulkhead image and inside Gray's mind. America would have to skim close past Earth to get onto the alien's tail. They might pick up a bit of additional boost from Earth's gravity, though the effect would be minute compared to the power of the carrier's gravitic drive. Mostly the navigation department would have to allow for a slight course shift as America skimmed past the planet's upper atmosphere. Gray was naturally impatient to get underway, but let the debarkation proceed at its own pace. As commander of the entire carrier battle group, his proper sphere of interest was the big picture, not the handling of one ship. He linked into the transmissions being relayed around the planet now from the destroyer Elliot. The destroyer was similar in overall design to the carrier, but her shield cap was a slightly flattened cone, blunt, elongated, and deeply scoured by pitting and dust erosion, despite the best efforts of her nanomatrix hull. Still, viewed from a battlespace drone pacing the Elliot as she accelerated out from Earth, she was an impressive sight. Her quarry was already well over 6 million kilometers ahead of her, however. As soon as the mystery ship had gotten clear of Earth's atmosphere, it had put on an astonishing burst of acceleration. So much that Gray was immediately convinced that his guess that the vessel was not a human-built ship was confirmed. The vessel was definitely from someplace else. Gray would worry about the where later. For now, he had to focus on getting to the ship before it could get to wherever the hell it was going. "CAG, this is Gray." "Yes, Admiral," Captain Connie Fletcher replied in his mind. Her title, from Commander Air Group, derived from the time when aircraft carriers plied Earth's oceans, and fighters needed an atmosphere to stay aloft. The CO of America's contingent of fighters, recon snoops, and other small spacecraft was in the carrier's primary flight control center aft. Pri-fly, in the traditional terminology dating back to those same times. "We need to stop Charlie 1. America won't be able to catch them in a stern chase, and I doubt that the Hawes or the Elliot will be able to either. It's going to be up to the fighters." "We've been looking at intercept vectors, Admiral. It might be possible, but it'll be tight. A hell of a lot depends on how soon Charlie can drop into metaspace." "Do what you can, Connie. Those people may be Shadar, and they've been talking to the Confeds. We need to know what they've been talking about." "Will do, Admiral. The Black Demons are in the best position for an intercept. That will mean dropping some of our LEO coverage." "Do it. The Marines are wrapping things up at Verdun, and Charlie out there has just become our #1 priority." But one squadron against a frigate-sized ship of unknown capabilities and escorting fighters? Those were not good odds. He flashed an order to the 2 capital ships now maneuvering down to low Earth orbit, ordering them to join the chase as well, but they almost certainly wouldn't be able to catch up with Charlie 1. Quickly, Gray searched the fleet network, looking for a warship positioned in such a way that it could intercept the fleeing alien. Let's see. Mars and Jupiter were both at completely wrong angles, with Earth between them and the alien ship just now. There was a small USNA flotilla still out in Saturn space, watching over the newly recaptured stations at Enceladus, Titan, and the Huygens Ring Facility Observatory. However, at the moment, Saturn was a good 9 AUs out from Earth, which meant a time delay of 72 minutes for any message from America's Communications Department to reach them. There was a high guard watch ship, the Concorde, in a good position within the asteroid belt, at Vesta, just to one side of the Sun and 3 AUs from Earth at this angle, with a time delay of 24 minutes. better, much better. High Guarders weren't in the same league as line naval capital ships, but were designed to keep an eye on asteroids that might pose a threat to Earth, either by chance or through enemy action. Yet they were in the best position to handle Charlie 1. Gray called up the ship and its skipper's personnel records. Technically, the High Guard was a Confederation organization, jointly run by Geneva and by the USNA military through Mars HQ. But that had been the situation before the Civil War. For the past year, the High Guard had been primarily a USNA operation pretty much by default, since most of the personnel and ships had come from the United States. Concorde's skipper was Commander Terrence Dahlquist, and he was a former USNA naval officer. Excellent. "Come," he said, "this is Admiral Gray. Make to the Concorde." And he began detailing what he had in mind. Emergency Presidential Command Post, Toronto, United States of North America, 038 hours EST.
Well, looks like we're big boys now,
said Tom, as the three cadets strolled down the corridor away from Captain Strong's office.
They don't hand out secret and important missions to cadet units unless they're really on the ball.
But we've got Major Blastoff Connell to educate,
grumbled Roger.
What do you mean, educate?
Asked Astro.
You know he's the roughest officer in the academy,
replied the blonde-haired cadet.
He eats cadets for breakfast, lunch and dinner, and then has an extra one for dessert. He isn't just tough, his hide's made of armor plate. But I've got a hunch that if we play dumb at first, then smarten up slowly, we can make him feel that he's done it for us. So he'll be easier on us.
Say, it's after 11,
exclaimed Tom.
We better hurry.
Suddenly, as if a rocket cruiser were blasting off in the corridors, a roar, deafening and powerful, filled their ears. And beneath its ferocity, there were 4 unmistakable words.
Polaris unit! Stand to!
Every muscle, every bone in their 3 bodies snapped to rigid attention simultaneously. Eyes straight, chins in, the cadets waited for whatever calamity had befallen them. From behind came quick, heavy footsteps. They drew closer until they passed alongside and then abruptly stopped. There, in front of them, stood the one and only Major Blastoff Connell. Though a few inches shorter than Astro, he was what Astro might become in 30 years, heavily muscular, with a barrel chest that filled the gold and black uniform tightly. He stood balanced on the balls of his small feet like a boxer, hands hanging loosely at his sides. A bulldog chin jutted out of his rough-hewn face as if it were going to snap off the head of the nearest cadet. He towered over Tom and Roger, and though shorter than Astro, he made up for this by sheer force of personality. When he spoke, his voice was like a deep foghorn that had suddenly learned the use of vowels.
So, this is the Great Polaris Unit, eh?
He bellowed.
You're 2 minutes late!
Tom suddenly felt that he and his unit mates were all alone in that corridor with the Major. He glanced to one side, then the other, cautiously, and saw it was empty. And for good reason. No one wanted to be around when Blastoff Connell was blasting. Cadets, enlisted men, and even officers were not safe from his sudden outbursts. He drove himself so hard that he became impatient with others who weren't able to match his drive. It was not because of ego, but rather to get the job at hand finished. More than once he had dressed down a captain of the Solar Guard in the same tone he used on a green earthworm. It was legend around the Academy that once, believing he was right, he'd broken into the council chamber itself to argue his point. He won by unanimous decision. Nothing but nothing had been devised or thought of that could stop Blastoff Connell. Every waking moment of his adult life had been spent in the pursuit of more and more knowledge about space, space travel, and life on the other planets. Now his wrath at fever pitch at their being tardy, he stood in front of the cadets, turning his anger on Roger first.
Your name's Manning, isn't it?
He growled.
Yes, sir,
replied Roger.
Father got a medal. He used to be a Solar Guard officer.
That's right, sir. He was killed in space.
Nah, no. He was a good man. You'll never be the man he was if you live 10,000 years. But if you don't try to be a better man than he was, you won't live 5 minutes with me. Is that clear, Cadet Manning?
Very clear, sir.
Gulped Roger. Connell turned to Astro.
And you're the homegrown atomic rocket genius. Venusian style, eh?
Yes, sir.
Choked Astro.
I'm from Venus.
Bucked rockets on the old chemical burners as a kid before entering the academy, eh?
Asked Connell. There was less than 1.5 inches between Astro's face and Major Connell's jaw.
Yes, sir.
Answered Astro.
I was an enlisted man before coming to the academy.
Well, get this, you rocket buster!
Roared Connell.
I want a power deck that will give me what I want when I want it, or you'll be back in the ranks again. Is that clear, Cadet Astro?
Yes, sir. Everything she's got when you want it, sir.
And I like to have a power deck clean enough to eat off the deck plates.
Yes, sir.
Stuttered Astro, growing more and more confused.
You like to eat off the deck plates, sir.
By the craters of Luna, no! I don't like to eat off the deck plates, but I want them clean enough to eat there if I want to.
Yes, sir.
Astro's voice was hardly above a whisper.
And you're the tactical wizard that won the space maneuvers recently? Single-handed, eh?
Asked Connell, bending down to face Tom.
Our side won, sir, if that answers your question.
Replied Tom. He was as nervous as Roger and Astro, but he fought for control. He was determined not to be bullied.
I didn't ask you who won,
Snapped Connell.
but you're the one just the same. Control deck, cadet, eh? Well, you work with me. On the control deck, there's only room for one brain, one decision, one answer. And when I'm on the control deck, that decision, answer, and brain will be mine!
I understand perfectly, sir.
Said Tom tonelessly. Connell stepped back, fists on his hips, eyeing the 3 cadets. He had heard about their difficulty in fitting personalities together when they had first arrived at Space Academy, as described in Stand By for Mars. And he had heard about their triumph over the Martian desert. He was impressed with everything he had learnt about them, but he knew that he had a reputation for being tough, and that this reputation usually brought out the best in cadets. Early in his long and brilliant career, he had learnt that his life depended on the courage and ingenuity of his fellow spacemen. When he became an instructor at the academy, he had determined that no cadet would ever be anything but the best, and that when they blasted off in their later years, they could be depended on. He looked at the 3 cadets and felt a tinge of excitement that did not show on his scowling face.
Yes,
He thought.
they'll make spacemen. It'll take a little time, but they're good material. Now listen to this.
He bawled.
We blast off for Venus Space Station in exactly 30 minutes. Get your gear aboard the Polaris and stand by to raise ship.
He dropped his voice and pushed out his jaw a little farther.
This will be the toughest journey you'll ever make. You'll either come back spaceman, or you'll come back nothing. I'm going to try my best to make it.
He paused and added coldly,
Nothing. Because if you can't take it from me, then you don't belong in space. Unit dismissed.
He turned on his heel and disappeared up the slide stairs without another look at the 3 rigid cadets.
Yeah, we'll educate him, all right.
Said Astro softly, with a wink at Tom.
Make him think he's done everything for us.
Ah, go blast your jets.
Snarled Roger after he'd found his voice.
Come on,
Said Tom.
let's get the Polaris ready. And fellows, I mean ready.
Bill Loring and Al Mason stood near the entrance to the control tower of the Academy spaceport and watched the 3 cadets of the Polaris scramble into the giant rocket cruiser.
Every time I think about that Connell kicking us out of space for 12 months, I want to pound his head in with a wrench.
Snarled Loring. Mason snorted.
Well, what's the use of us hanging around here?
He asked.
That Connor wouldn't have us aboard the Polaris, even if we were cleared and had our papers. There ain't a thing we can do.
Don't give up so easy. There's a fortune setting up there in space, just waiting for me and you to come and take it. and no big shot Solar Guard officer is going to keep me from getting it.
Yeah,
grumbled Mason.
but what are you gonna do about it?
I'll show you what I'm going to do,
said Loring.
We're heading for Venusport.
Venusport? By the moons of Jupiter, what are we gonna do there?
Get a free ride to Terra.
But how? I only got a few hundred credits and you ain't got much more. There ain't nobody going to go 50 billion miles on nothing.
Loring's eyes followed the massive figure of Major Connell on the slidewalk as it swept across the spaceport field toward the Polaris.
You just buy us a couple of seats on the next rocket to Venusport and stop asking stupid questions. When we see Major Blastoff Connell again, we'll be giving the orders with a parallel ray.
The two disgruntled spacemen turned quickly and walked to the nearest slidewalk, disappearing around a building. Aboard the Polaris, Tom confronted his two unit mates.
Now look, fellas. After the hard time Major Connell just gave us, let's see if we can't really stay on the ball from now on.
Alright with me, Tom.
Astro said, nodding his head.
You're having space dreams, Corbett.
Drawled Roger.
No matter what we do for old Blastoff, we'll wind up behind the 8-ball.
But if we really try,
urged Tom,
if we all do our jobs, there can't be anything for him to fuss about.
We'll make it tough for him to give us any demerits.
Astro chimed in.
Right,
said Tom.
It won't work,
grumbled Roger.
You saw the way he chewed us up, and for what? I ask you, for what?
He was just trying to live up to his reputation, Roger,
replied Tom.
But common sense will tell you that if you're on the ball, you won't get demerits.
What's the matter, hotshot?
Growled Astro.
Afraid of a little work?
Listen, you Venusian clunk,
sneered Roger.
I'll work the pants off you any day in the week, and that includes Titan days too.
Okay.
Tom smiled.
Save half of that energy for the Polaris, Roger.
Yeah, use some of that manning hot air to shine brass,
suggested Astro.
Come on, let's get this wagon in shape,
said Tom. He turned to the instrument panel on the great control board. A moment later, the three cadets were busy shining the few bits of brass and rechecking the many controls and levers. Suddenly, there was the sound of a hatch slamming below, and then Astro's voice came whispering over the intercom.
Watch it, fellas. Here he comes.
The airtight hatch leading to the control deck slid back, and Major Connell stepped inside. With one sweeping glance, he took in the control deck and the evidence of their work.
Unit! Stand to!
He roared. Astro climbed into the control deck and snapped to attention with his unit mates as Connell began a quick but thorough check of the many dials and switches and relays on the control panel. He mused.
Been doing a little work, I see.
Oh, nothing special, sir,
said Roger.
Well, from now on it's gonna be special!
Roared Connell.
Yes, sir,
acknowledged Roger quickly.
Alright, at ease,
ordered Connell. As the three boys relaxed, Connell stepped over to the astrogation board and snapped a switch. Immediately, a solar chart filled the huge chart screen. It was a black and white view of the planet Venus.
This is where we're going first,
he said, placing a finger on a ball-shaped satellite in orbit around the misty planet.
This is the Venus space station. As you know, Venus has no natural satellite of its own, so we built one. We'll blast off from here and go directly to the space station, where the Polaris will be fitted with hyperdrive for deep space operations. While at the station, you will acquaint yourselves with the operation of the new audio communications transmitter. When I'm satisfied that you can handle it under the prevailing conditions of an extended spaceflight, we'll blast off for a test of its range and performance.
Major Connell paused and faced the cadets squarely. Then he continued.
This is an important mission, one which I hope will enable the Solar Guard to establish the first base outside of our solar system. Our destination is Tara, in the star system of Alpha Centauri. Tara is a planet in a stage of development similar to that of Earth several million years ago. Its climate is tropical, and lush vegetation, jungles really, covers the land surface. Two great oceans separate the land masses. One is called Alpha, the other Omega. I was on the first expedition when Tara was discovered, and have just returned from the second, during which we explored it and ran tests to learn if it could sustain human life. All tests show that Tara can be transformed into a paradise.
Connell paused, took in a deep breath, and continued.
I shall expect more than just hard work from you. I want everything you have to offer. Not just good performance, but excellence. I will not tolerate anything less. And if I'm forced to resort to extreme disciplinary action to get what I demand, then you can expect to receive every demerit in the book.
He stepped closer to the three cadets.
Remember, spaceman or nothing. Now stand by to blast off.
Without a word, the three cadets hurried to their stations and began routine procedure to raise ship.
All departments ready to blast off, Major Connell,
reported Tom, saluting sharply.
Very well, Corbett. Proceed,
said Connell. Tom called into the intercom.
Stand by for blast off.
He then opened the circuit to the teleceiver screen overhead and spoke to the spaceport control tower.
Polaris to spaceport control. Request permission to blast off. Request orbit.
Spaceport traffic to Polaris. Your orbit has been cleared 089. Repeat, 089. Blast off in 2 minutes.
Orbit 089, blast off -159, 58.
You read me clear, Polaris.
Tom clicked off the switch and turned to the intercom.
Control deck to radar bridge. Do we have a clear tangent forward and up?
All clear forward and up, Tom,
replied Roger.
Control deck to power deck. Energize the cooling pumps.
Cooling pumps in operation,
answered Astro briskly. The giant ship began to shudder as the mighty pumps on the power deck started their slow, whining build-up. Tom sat in front of the control panel, strapped himself into the acceleration chair, and began checking the dials and gauges. Satisfied everything was in order, he fastened his eyes to the sweeping red second hand on the solar clock. The teleceiver screen brought a sharp picture of the surrounding base of the spaceship, and he saw that it was all clear. The second hand reached the 10-second mark.
Stand by to raise ship,
bawled Tom into the intercom. The red hand moved steadily, surely, to the 0 at the top of the clock face. Tom reached for the master switch.
Blast off -5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Tom threw the switch. Slowly, the giant ship raised itself from the ground. Then, faster and faster, pushing the 4 spacemen deep into their acceleration cushions, it hurtled spaceward. In a few seconds, the Polaris was gravity-free. Once again, Earthmen had started another journey to the stars.